Welcome to Biztechasia Technology Show. Pure Storage is a leading provider of enterprise-grade all-flash block, file, and object storage. Now, it's listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Now, to tell us more about the company and how it's innovating and helping its customers, our guest for today is Matthew Oostveen. He's the Chief Technology Officer and Vice President, Asia Pacific and Japan at Pure Storage. Now, Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's great to be here.
Now, great to have you, Matt. Now, for a start, could you give us an overview of Pure Storage and what it does, and also what your footprint is like across the region?
Yeah, happy to. We are an organization that focuses on data management and data storage. We manufacture our own flash arrays, so that's using a solid state technology, which of course is faster and much more energy efficient for customers to be able to improve the management and flow of information around their organization. We participate heavily in the cloud, hybrid cloud, as well as this new cloud native space, and have made big investments from an engineering perspective around that. What does our presence look like around the region? It's very strong. But we have a presence in every major country in the Asia Pacific region, and that's all headquartered out of Singapore.
Okay, when people think of flash storage, you often think at a very micro level, at an individual PC level. Give us a sense of how flash storage has evolved over the years from a technology perspective.
We like to think of it as being very small and being able to save customers lots of space inside a data center, which of course is really important with this era of data center sprawl that we're going through. But the evolution of solid state has been one of condensation, I suppose. We've been able to condense and compress the amount of storage that you can fit inside these arrays. And we're now at a point where you're able to fit hundreds of terabytes into the palm of your hand in these drives that we manufactured, something that we call a DFM that's unique to our organization. And there is an inexorable growth going on at the moment in our ability to be able to fit more and more density inside the racks of these storage systems.
Now, so here's the thing, before the show, Matt, we were talking about how I've been in tech for many, many years. So I still remember a terabyte would take a whole mainframe or one floor basically of mainframes to store 1 terabyte. So technology has definitely evolved tremendously. How are you competitive with some of the behemoths that are basically in the storage business? What's your competitive advantage?
Well, I like to think of the advantage, and of course there's many, many advantages, but the one that stands out to me is the fact that we spend more, when I say spend, invest more on research and development than our competitors. So if you look at our organization as a whole, we spend just around 18% of all of our revenue going back into R&D. That's around double our closest competitor. It's about 4 times the industry leader within the space. And so if you think about that, we spend more on our research and development. We're already a generation or 2 ahead of our competitors. And we like to think that that is a great competitive advantage, because not only can they close the gap on us, but we continue to extend the gap on our competitors.
Okay, and so this brings me to my next interesting point. Now, you've been involved in Formula One for many, many years. I think almost a decade. You've been a sponsor of the Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team. Tell us about this relationship and how you are providing value to that organization and also getting value from that sponsorship and that technical partnership.
Yeah, that's it's technically a sponsorship, and it's a word that I never use, because before I became a CTO, and I've spent the last 10 years as a CTO in multinational organizations, I used to sit on the same side of the desk of the people that were consuming technology. And I always remember the vendors would come around and they would be very gracious in giving you a Formula One ticket and talk about their sponsorships. And I used to sit there and I used to think, what do you really do for this team other than put your name on the side of the car? And so when I came to Pure, the first thing I wanted to understand was, what do we really do for Mercedes-Benz, and how are we helping them win on track? And it's through this educational process that I now use the language of a partnership, a technical partnership, and not a sponsorship, because really that's what it means to me. And it started off a long time ago, where we were able to help the Mercedes team with the on-track team. So these are the people that go around race to race, not the factory. to be able to improve their infrastructure footprint. In other words, flash storage is a lot lighter than the hard drives, but you need to ship this equipment around the world. It needs to be very sturdy. It goes from, race to race. I think there was something like 20 races across the calendar. And if you're able to vastly reduce the amount of weight that needs to be transported, of course, there is an ongoing saving for that organization. But once Mercedes started playing with the tools, once they understood the value of what we really do when it came to data management, that's when we had this explosion from the Mercedes side in the utilization of our tech. So we help the team in three major ways today. We've got our systems supporting the strategy team. So that's the men and women that make the really important calls on race day of whether to bring Lewis Hamilton into the pit, whether to leave George out, all predicated on what the other teams are doing or what the weather might be doing. It rains, you get red flags, other teams might be changing their strategy. And of course, the Mercedes team need to be hyper dynamic. And that means the ability to make calls in real time with rapid information. There is no other storage system on the planet as fast as our systems. And of course, that means we can get the information to Toto Wolff just in time so he can make some race calls. And interestingly, you might like this, Brian, because you're an F1 guy. We actually have some back-end audio of conversations between Lewis Hamilton, Toto Wolff, and the strategy teams in the ability to be able to get a call very last minute into Lewis's earpiece and bring him into a pit. It was very close. And because of that pit, he was able to win a race. That's just the strategy team. We also help back at the factory as well. And I think this is really important. An enormous amount of investment goes into the supercomputing environment. The supercomputing environment is where a lot of the testing is done for parts, whether that is to do with aerodynamic testing from a computational fluid dynamics perspective, or a technology they use in the supercomputer called FEA, finite element analysis. And this is where they're actually doing simulated crash testing of the systems to check that the parts are strong and they're durable in the event of an accident. Well, the supercomputer that runs these software elements and these software packages, like everything else in Formula One, is really heavily governed by the FIA. So the FIA, they say this is the dimensions for the car, this is what the weight the vehicle should be. But they also say, this is how powerful your supercomputer can be. It can be so many teraflops. It can have this many GPUs and this many CPUs. So we worked really closely with Mercedes-Benz to be able to figure out ways that we could keep the CPU and GPU utilization closer to 100%, because what's not regulated by the FIA is the speed of the data plane. In other words, the storage underneath that. So we have a technology called the FlashBlade. It was the fastest way for Mercedes-Benz to be able to deliver data into their supercomputer. And so now we have these multiple environments within Mercedes-Benz where the finite element analysis teams or the computational fluid dynamics teams that are doing the aero parts work on our flash array systems. They send workload across to the supercomputer, which runs on flash array technology, and that comes back and enables them to do part testing and analysis much more rapidly, which means that they can go through faster iterations and upgrade the car more quickly. And I tell you, I'll stop at this point because there's so much that we do, Brian, but I don't want to spend the whole time talking about F1 with you.
So, but one of the key things is, which is very important for the audience listening to it, whether it's a chief technology officer, whether your board member, is this: the value that you are creating. And I can sum that up very simply as giving Mercedes-Benz, from what you just said, a competitive advantage in an ultra competitive business environment or competitive environment where milliseconds make a difference between winning and losing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the teams will do an extraordinary amount of things to try and get a fraction of a second, because it does add up per lap. And in fact, there's been many races where Mercedes-Benz not necessarily have just won a race, by a car length or half a car length, which translates to, less than a tenth of a second, maybe, 5/1000ths of a second. But also it's enabled them to pick up podium positions and many more points during the course of the year, which of course translates to revenue for an F1 team.
Now, I want to then take this conversation forward, but really on a broader perspective. we have an explosion of data being created. So an F1 team, for example, so if you look at the car, it's created on track and then sent back to Brackley in the UK, where Mercedes the team is. And there's this, terabytes of data that's created, that's all organizations, whether it's a bank, whether it's an insurance company, and so forth. What does the future of data storage look like? Because CIOs and CTOs are just looking at this and saying, how do I manage all this data?
Well, I hope that the future is looking bright, but that's really going to depend on what the marketplace decides to do and how they want to spend their money, and whether they're able to change the way that they think for the type of investments that they're making. Because you're absolutely right. There's this incredible growth in the amount of data that we're seeing. If you listen to IDC, they say the size of the digital universe doubles in size every 18 months or so. And if you think about what that means in the context of our organizations, whether it's a financial services company or insurer or whatever it might be, it means that you need to manage much more. It means that you're putting much more strain on your data center. It means that you're asking your people to do more as well. But we're not asking them to do more with less. We're asking them to do much more with much less. So the decisions that CIOs make today will directly lead to the digital future for that organization tomorrow. And so our view is that we need to start replacing these hard drives with solid state media. We need to start rationalizing our data center space, because data center sprawl is a very big issue. Energy consumption within the data center is a huge issue. And the capability for an individual to be able to manage vast amounts of information, petabytes of information per user, by the way, or per administrator, means that we need to start thinking more rationally about the decisions that we're making there, and not just thinking about the upfront price, for example, but what's the corollary effect across the IT organization.
So what's that? I want to interject there. And when you talk about price, we've got to go back to that basic IT adage of total cost of ownership, right? Because the reality is the following. The total cost of ownership now has to incorporate an ESG or sustainability element into it as well.
Yeah, Brian, that's absolutely on the money. And in fact, you've brought a really good point up, because last year, and this is how quickly things change in tech. Last year, customers bought on feeds and speeds. Call them feeds and speeds. How fast is your system? What's the flow of data? How quickly can you provide information to a database, for example? That's evolved into how green is your system? What's the sustainability? What's the life cycle? What does it mean for our ESG reports? But moreover, when you're looking at jurisdictions which, outside of Asia Pacific and Japan, but look at London, or the UK, where the price of energy has gone up 600%, all of a sudden energy savings are a significant part of the thinking for any rational CIO. And in fact, if we look within Asia Pacific ourselves at what the companies are doing from a power perspective, we know that electricity costs make up some 60% of an OPEX budget for some of the larger telcos within the region. So, these are really important elements that have evolved beyond just thinking about how fast the system may be.
Now, so how do we then make data centers more sustainable in the future? Because because of the explosion of data, you have countries like Singapore saying, no, we're not going to have any more data centers built on our territory. And then obviously, big data center operators have to look at different markets. How is that future looking like, that sustainable data center future? How do we make that happen?
I think the Singaporean government was very wise in putting a moratorium on data center construction, a few years back. They did lift it earlier this year, and they lifted it with caveats as well. So, we're in this era where we're realizing just how much energy is consumed by a data center, and therefore the impact on the utilities within a country. So we'll pick on Singapore. We've got limited land space. We've got limited capability to deliver energy into data centers. Data centers mopping up a lot of our water and a lot of our land space. Then we need to think more rationally. Now, it's been measured that 7% of Singaporean electricity consumption is directed towards a data center. So we really can't see that number growing any further. We need to do what we can from a tech perspective to try and reduce that. Obviously, government mandates and policies help a great deal. But if we think about storage and how much energy storage uses within the data center, it's estimated to be somewhere between 30% and 40%. So not quite half, but say it's a third as a round number. Well, if we think of a hard drive and compare that to solid state, there's probably a 10x energy saving that's available there. So from an overall perspective, we could arguably, if we replaced every hard drive in Singapore that was sitting inside a data center, reduce that 7% down to 6%, down to 5.5%, and make a meaningful impact on the environment as well as the utility system here in Singapore.
So this then brings an interesting question. We should be able to substantially reduce our electricity consumption on existing data center just during the next replacement cycle, or when we start to swap out the old hard drives with the solid state drives.
That's it. There's a really big opportunity in front of us.
Now, looking ahead for this year, what's technically coming up from Pure Storage?
Well, we're in the solid state business. So, we've never been interested in what happens in spinning disk media or physical disk media. We've always been a proponent of solid state being the most efficient. What that means is we've made deep investments. And I was talking earlier about the 18% of revenue that we spend on research and development. A lot of that goes into material sciences. Now, what makes us unique as well is that we're the only enterprise storage company on the planet that has direct buying relationships with the NAND plants. So these are the actual fab manufacturers of NAND. Everyone else is buying 1 or 2 steps away, and they buy them as drives. We manufacture our own drives. That means we've got material science people based inside Pure Storage that are looking and playing at the next with the next generation of infrastructure. We work very closely with these manufacturers. We've been watching the ability to fit more data into a denser footprint. So what that means is we've moved to new technologies away from what we call TLC, which is a triple layer technology, towards QLC. It's a quad layer technology. We're actively investigating whether we can go to the next step, which is a technology called PLC. That's a penta-level cell. At this point, we're putting 5 cells inside the 5 bits inside the cell, I should say. And we were the first enterprise storage company on the planet to be able to produce QLC at scale. So, we're really looking forward to what the future will hold, whether that's going to be PLC or whether that's going to be more layers put onto QLC and TLC technology. There's a lot of acronyms there. But
Matt, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've really learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience has as well. But before you leave, any final takeaways that you'd like to leave the audience with, particularly if people who are looking through the lens of a CIO or really a key decision maker in a large organization?
Yeah, I've got some simple advice, and it's to think about storage in a rational manner. And I know that there is a tendency out there to think of storage, almost dismiss it under the guise of it being just a commodity. Well, that's just not true. And the advice that I would give to the CIOs and the CTOs out there is to think about how strategically important storage is for an organization, to realize that the only commodity out there is just the element that is known as a hard drive or element that is known as a piece of solid state. But what an enterprise storage company does bring together is the ability to create a lot of value for CIOs and CTOs. So, think about what impact storage can have inside your organization.
Matt, thank you for taking your time to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Matt Oostveen. He's the Chief Technology Officer and Vice President, Asia Pacific and Japan from Pure Storage on BizTech's Technology Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.